Jasmine Crockett's speech offered a deeply personal and emotionally charged story that drew attention to her early encounter with Vice President Kamala Harris, casting Harris in a light that emphasized empathy, mentorship, and strength. In Mauai, that moment, Crockett wasn't speaking as a polished politician, but as a human being who had walked into a room carrying the weight of doubt and the pressure of representation. Her story began with vulnerability, an admission that she had arrived at a pivotal political event feeling uncertain, a black woman in a high-stakes environment, questioning if she truly belonged. Her authenticity in sharing those emotions served not only to humanize her experience, but to highlight a larger narrative about representation in politics. The story turned when she described how Kamala Harris took the time to connect with her in a way that was unexpected and deeply affirming. Rather than offering distant pleasantries or shallow encouragement, Harris engaged with Crockett on a personal level, locking eyes with her and offering a gesture that said more than words, an expression of solidarity, of shared understanding, that transcends political protocol. Crockett recalled how Harris placed a hand on her shoulder and told her something as simple as, "You belong here." It was a short sentence, but in the context of where and how it was said, it carried profound weight. For Crockett, those words did more than ease anxiety. They reshaped her perspective on her role and purpose in that space. It was a moment of clarity and affirmation, one that reminded her of the responsibility she carried not just to her constituents, but to a wider community of people who rarely see themselves reflected in the halls of power. Her story framed Harris not just as a leader, but as someone capable of recognizing and nurturing potential in others, someone who remembers what it's like to be underestimated and makes the intentional choice to uplift those who face similar challenges. This connection with Harris symbolized something greater, a bridge between generations of black women leaders who have carved out space in systems not built for them. Crockett's story did not dwell in sentimentality for its own sake. It was purposeful. She used her vulnerability to spotlight the importance of mentorship, the power of shared experience, and the emotional labor that often goes unacknowledged in political spaces. The story resonated because it painted a picture of what leadership should look like, not detached or performative, but grounded in compassion, with an eye toward lifting others. Her delivery was marked by pauses and inflections that gave the audience time to absorb what she was saying. She didn't rush through the anecdote, nor did she treat it as a side note. It was central to her message, that true leadership isn't about commanding attention or asserting dominance, but about creating room for others to grow. In recounting her exchange with Harris, Crockett illuminated how a few genuine words, offered at the right time, could reverberate far beyond the moment. The audience's reaction was telling. What began as a quiet, reflective portion of the speech gradually built momentum as listeners connected with the rawness of her experience. There was a collective understanding in the room, an acknowledgement that moments like these, though deeply personal, have a universal resonance. People know what it feels like to doubt themselves. They understand the significance of someone else seeing their worth before they do. And in a political climate often defined by cynicism and division, this story offered a rare glimpse of sincerity and warmth. Crockett's approach did not lean on flashy rhetoric or applause lines. Instead, it drew strength from emotional clarity and unfiltered truth. By inviting her audience into that moment of vulnerability, she didn't just share a story, she modeled the kind of leadership she believes in, rooted in personal experience, shaped by empathy, and guided by the intention to empower. It was a political moment, yes, but also a deeply human one, and in telling it, she subtly challenged others in power to lead with the same kind of authenticity and heart. Jasmine Crockett's speech took a powerful turn when she drew a sharp and deliberate contrast between Vice President Kamala Harris and a political figure whose background and conduct stand in stark opposition to the values she was uplifting. Her comparison was not made to simply elevate Harris as an individual, but to lay bare the fundamental differences in how leadership, responsibility, and character manifest in the public sphere. Crockett crafted this comparison with intentional clarity, aiming to emphasize the value of integrity and the lived experience of leaders who genuinely reflect the people they serve. In her speech, Crockett painted a vivid picture of Vice President Harris's journey, a story of resilience, ambition, and grounded beginnings. She emphasized how Harris, like many working-class Americans, took on jobs like working at McDonald's to support herself through college. That single detail carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken realities. It was a subtle but sharp reminder that Harris understands firsthand what it means to struggle, to grind, and to push forward without a safety net. That kind of background does more than shape a leader's perspective. It defines how they govern, how they relate to everyday people, and how they respond to the burdens of others. Crockett did not simply highlight Harris's achievements. She contextualized them within the framework of accountability and work ethic. She spoke of the discipline it takes to rise through the ranks of law, politics, and public service, not through inherited power or media spectacle, but through service, intellect, and unrelenting dedication. Her tone was reverent, yet rooted in facts, a declaration that leadership earned is far more valuable than leadership assumed. Then came the contrast. Without using a name, Crockett referred to a figure who represents the antithesis of Harris's story, someone born into privilege, surrounded by enablers, and ultimately known more for manipulation and scandal than for service or sacrifice. The distinction she made was pointed but measured, allowing the contrast to speak for itself. One path built on sweat, study, and sacrifice. The other on entitlement, exploitation, and evasion. The reference to legal troubles served as a cultural mirror. In recent times, the idea of justice has been strained by partisanship and media distortion. By reminding the audience of a public figure's entanglement in the justice system, Crockett was not simply offering criticism. She was reinforcing the idea that accountability still matters. She reminded listeners that character is not defined by how loudly someone speaks, but by the trail of actions they leave behind, by whether they build or destroy, include or divide, serve or manipulate. Her delivery during this part of the speech was deliberate and controlled, with an unmistakable undertone of righteous anger, not for the sake of outrage, but to provoke a reckoning. Crockett was urging her audience to stop normalizing misconduct and start demanding better. She wasn't offering a lecture, she was issuing a challenge, that Americans refuse to be gaslit into thinking that corruption is normal, or that dishonesty is simply how the game is played. In doing so, she implicitly called on citizens and elected officials alike to take a hard look at the people they empower and what those choices say about the collective conscience of the nation. The story of Harris's rise from humble beginnings was not offered as a fairy tale or a PR move. It was a statement about what kind of experience shapes a leader who governs with empathy. Crockett used Harris's story to remind listeners that those who have lived through struggle often carry with them a kind of moral compass that can't be faked. That matters when it comes to decisions about education, healthcare, criminal justice, and civil rights, because someone who's been there doesn't just sympathize, they understand. And someone who has only ever looked down from a place of advantage will never see the full picture of what most Americans endure every day. As she spoke, Crockett built a bridge between the personal and the political. Her contrast wasn't just about two people. It was about two Americas, one where people believe in building power through community, equity, and justice, and another where power is hoarded, flaunted, and weaponized. She made it clear that voters must decide which vision they support, not just with their ballots, but with their standards. By holding up Harris's path as an example, she wasn't asking for admiration, she was asking for reflection. Who are we choosing to follow, and why? Jasmine Crockett's speech was a direct and passionate call for a shift in tone and strategy within the Democratic Party. At the heart of her message was a belief that the party's traditional approach, often grounded in civility, patience, and institutional respect, has not matched the urgency or aggressiveness of the political moment. Her call was not for chaos, but for clarity and conviction. She wasn't asking for noise for the sake of attention. She was advocating for a more courageous, unapologetic form of engagement, one that reflects the real frustrations and fears of everyday people. As she addressed the audience, Crockett spoke from experience, someone who has faced vitriol, disrespect, and political gamesmanship firsthand. Her voice carried the weight of a leader who understands that decorum doesn't always deliver justice and that polite conversations don't always bring about real policy change. She was urging her colleagues and her party to understand that they are not just in debates, they are in battles over truth, rights, and the very function of democracy. To meet that kind of challenge, she argued, the response must be as forceful as the threat. Crockett was especially focused on the idea that Democrats have too often played by a set of rules that their opponents routinely discard. While one side leans on aggression and spectacle to push its message, the other leans on procedure and tradition, hoping reason will win the day. But reason alone, she made clear, is no match for misinformation, fear-mongering, and unchecked audacity. What's needed, she argued, is not just a change in policy, but a change in posture. It's time for Democrats to stop explaining and start declaring, to stop waiting for fairness and start demanding it. Her speech hit a particular chord when she spoke about emotional authenticity. She wasn't just calling for strategic boldness. She was calling for Democrats to show that they care deeply and visibly about the issues that affect people's lives. Too often, she said, party leaders speak in detached, measured tones about problems that demand outrage. Gun violence, voter suppression, racial injustice, reproductive rights. Her point was simple and piercing. If Democrats don't show how much these issues matter, how will voters believe that they do? This wasn't just a critique, it was a blueprint. Crockett talked about the power of emotional connection in politics, not as manipulation, but as mobilization. People respond to passion. They want to see leaders who don't just recite talking points, but who fight like they mean it. She called for speeches that feel like rallying cries, for actions that match the gravity of the moment, and for a party that isn't afraid to be loud when it's speaking truth. Her tone throughout was urgent but hopeful, angry but focused. She believed that the party had the talent, the message, and the moral high ground, but lacked the fire to push it through. What resonated most was her understanding of communication as more than words. It's body language, it's confidence. It's an unwillingness to yield the floor or dilute the message. Crockett challenged Democrats to own the room, not through arrogance, but through unapologetic truth-telling. She wanted a party that could confront misinformation not with polite corrections but with fierce clarity, a party that doesn't just resist attacks but calls them out as disgraceful and dangerous. The reaction from the room was unmistakable. People weren't just listening, they were feeling what she was saying. Crockett tapped into a sentiment that many progressives and moderates alike have been grappling with. The sense that the rules of political engagement have changed and the old tactics no longer serve. Her words were a reminder that silence and softness in the face of injustice can look like complicity. And so she continued to press the point. Democrats must speak louder, move faster, and strike harder with their values. She wasn't advocating for abandoning principles or decency, but for embracing a more direct and emotionally resonant way of leading. One that refuses to be gaslit or sidelined. One that leads with truth, but doesn't let truth get buried under layers of cautious language and procedural restraint. Through her conviction, she was painting a portrait of a political party that not only believes it's right, but acts like it. Jasmine Crockett's rise in the political spotlight is not the result of accident or spectacle. It is the product of intention, clarity, and the ability to connect with people in a way that feels raw and honest. In her speech, what stood out was not just what she said, but how she said it. Her words didn't rely on prepackaged slogans or rehearsed sound bites. Instead, they flowed with a natural rhythm, as if she were speaking directly to the frustrations and hopes of people who often feel unheard. That authenticity has turned her into one of the most watched and talked about figures in the current political landscape. Her viral moments, often sparked during high-stakes hearings or media interviews, aren't crafted for attention. They arise from conviction. When she raises her voice or delivers a sharp retort, it's not performative, it's reactive to disrespect, distortion, or hypocrisy. People respond because they recognize truth when they hear it, especially when it's delivered without apology. In an era where so much political language feels watered down or overly cautious, Crockett's candor stands out as a breath of fresh air. She doesn't hesitate to call out contradictions, defend her values, or hold her ground when pushed. What makes her particularly effective is her skill in combining intellect with emotion. She understands the intricacies of policy and law, but she doesn't talk over people's heads. She can break down complex issues in a way that feels accessible, and then deliver her point with a style that is sharp, witty, and unmistakably her own. Whether she's taking on bad faith arguments in a committee or addressing economic justice in a town hall, there's a consistent thread in her communication, a refusal to be dismissed, and a deep belief in accountability. Her rise also signals a shift in what political success looks like. In the past, many rising stars in government were carefully molded through think tanks, elite institutions, or party insiders. But Crockett's path is rooted in activism, community law, and direct service. That background gives her a lived understanding of the systems she now helps shape. When she speaks, she brings with her the voices of those who are often left behind in political discourse: working families, marginalized communities, and people facing systemic barriers. Her presence alone challenges long-standing assumptions about who belongs in power and how that power should be used. During her speech, she alluded to this reality without needing to spell it out. There was a sense that every story she told and every point she made was grounded in real-world experience. She's not just echoing the concerns of others, she's lived them. That kind of credibility can't be faked, and it's part of why her moments go viral. People don't just watch her clips because they're entertaining. They watch because they see someone saying the things they've been thinking, often with more courage and precision than they've seen from others in similar roles. Her ability to navigate tough, often hostile spaces with confidence and clarity has set a new standard for how elected officials can communicate. She doesn't backpedal when challenged. She doesn't dilute her message to avoid discomfort. Instead, she meets resistance head-on, equipped with facts and fortified by conviction. That makes her a compelling figure, not just for her supporters, but also for those who may be seeing her for the first time and wondering who she is and why she's commanding so much attention. She also understands the importance of media, both traditional and digital, as tools for influence and accountability. She doesn't shy away from visibility. Instead, she uses platforms to amplify issues that are often overlooked and to speak directly to people who may not feel engaged by conventional political dialogue. Through social media, interviews, and viral clips, she's created a feedback loop where her authenticity fuels attention, and that attention gives her more power to speak on behalf of those who need it most. Ultimately, her emergence as a political force reflects a broader demand for leaders who are both unflinching and empathetic, who don't just play the game but question why the rules exist in the first place. Her approach is proof that strength in politics doesn't have to come from bluster or spin. It can come from a clear-eyed commitment to truth, a deep connection to community, and the courage to speak without fear. Jasmine Crockett's speech was more than just a moment of personal expression. It was a defining message for a political era hungry for clarity, courage, and real leadership. Her voice carried not just her own story, but the weight of millions who often feel unheard in the noise of partisan politics. With her trademark blend of authenticity and precision, she offered more than critiques. She offered a vision of what leadership should look like when it is rooted in purpose rather than performance. Throughout her address, Crockett called on her party to stop being reactive and start being intentional. She urged her colleagues to stand not just with policy, but with passion. She reminded them, and her audience, that people are moved by those who care loudly, who refuse to shrink themselves in the face of power, and who are not afraid to show that they feel the weight of injustice. Her speech became a mirror held up to a party often stuck between institutional caution and grassroots urgency, between tradition and transformation. What makes Crockett's message so powerful is her refusal to separate intellect from emotion. She made it clear that moral clarity and legislative rigor are not mutually exclusive, that you can be well-versed in the law and still raise your voice, still show outrage, still stand your ground. That balance is what makes her such a compelling figure, and why so many people, especially younger voters and marginalized communities, are turning to her as a representative not just of political ideals, but of a lived, unapologetic truth. She also gave voice to the exhaustion that many Americans feel watching leaders talk around problems rather than through them. By calling out performative outrage on one side and passive politeness on the other, Crockett demanded more from everyone in the political arena. More honesty, more heart, more willingness to say what needs to be said, even if it breaks convention or makes people uncomfortable. In doing so, she showed that leadership isn't about maintaining the status quo, but about challenging it when it fails to serve the people. Her rise and her rhetoric serve as a reminder that viral moments, when grounded in truth and justice, can be a powerful force for political change. It's not about seeking the spotlight. It's about making sure the issues don't stay in the shadows. Her presence, her words, and her style all converge into a message that is clear and urgent. Democracy demands more than votes. It demands voice. In every pause, every pointed line, and every emotional beat, Jasmine Crockett redefined what it means to lead with both intellect and fire. She didn't just speak to a crowd, she activated it. And as her voice continues to rise on the national stage, she is proving that a new kind of leadership, honest, bold, and fearless, is not only possible but necessary.